Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Today I'd like to tie together a couple of my prior videos in a way that I didn't really think was possible and talk about exactly how socialism inevitably leads to fascism. Now I know a lot of you feel that these are completely opposite sides of the political compass, so let's break things down a little bit. First of all, the problem with socialism and communism, which I've covered in one of my other videos in more depth, but the biggest problem is that they drop everything to the lowest common denominator. So in other words, everyone has to work as fast as the slowest factory worker so that things are fair for everyone. This leads to a series of issues that I've already covered. But how exactly does it lead to fascism? Well, I was thinking a little bit more about one of my other videos, the most important thing in your life is you, or something along those lines. A video I did about how any positive that you do in the world is based off of you. That if you don't take care of yourself first, you can't take care of others. Now, this was a video talking about it on an individual scale, but thinking about it logically, it applies exactly the same way to governments. Governments just seem to be more aware of it. This means that no matter what your government structure is, the government has to take care of itself first to make sure that it can continue existing in order to take care of the needs of whoever it puts second. Now, in libertarianism and in most forms of mixed economy capitalism, there are things in place to put people, individuals, first. The definition of fascism, for the most part, is, I think Mussolini said something like a glorious pairing of government and corporations. Basically, it just means that you're taking care of the interests of businesses ahead of the interests of the people, in the belief that, the businesses will be the ones taking care of the people if the government takes care of the businesses. Now, in my opinion, there's a lot wrong with that, but we can talk more about what's wrong with fascism in another video. How exactly does socialism lead to fascism? Well, it's actually quite simple. Socialism, and I'm not talking about the halfway houses of social democracy or anything like that. I mean, full socialism, whenever it's been tried, has pretty much always, or nearly always, led to fascism. It's either collapsed or led to fascism, usually both. And I believe, with the research I've done at least, every fascist dictatorship and really every fascist country that's come to be has come directly out of some form or another of socialism. The reason for this is actually quite simple. See, socialism requires the government to take control of most, if not all, business entities, in taking power away from the people and giving it to the government when it comes to things like transportation, healthcare, education, and in full socialism, the means of production for things like vehicles and basically everything that can be produced fall under the purview of the government rather than the people. Now, remember, logically speaking, in order to even attempt to take care of its people, any government has to take care of its own needs first. And since the government is now innately tied to businesses and corporations in socialism and communism, especially socialism, this forces the government to put the needs of businesses above the needs of the people, to try to cover the needs of the people through businesses rather than by addressing them directly the way that they are in, say, a standard democratic republic. And don't get me wrong, I know that a democratic republic can vote in socialism, but for the most part, we don't see that happen because, well, most people can kind of realize almost instinctually why it's a bad idea, even if it hasn't been put to them in simple terms. Regardless, though, socialism requires the government to both take control of business entities and to put its own needs above the needs of the people. So while capitalism allows for a government that will put its own needs first and then the needs of the people second, socialism does not. It actually requires a government to become fascist, to start tying things more and more to, well, corporate entities and interests. I recently read the Snopes article on whether or not the Nazis were socialists. I think it was Hitler a socialist? I forget the exact title now. I had it pulled up the first time I did this video. This is a reshoot because things went wrong. Well, the video actually went great and then it corrupted. But basically the point of the Snopes article about Hitler and socialism isn't to say that they were not socialist. At no point does the article claim this. In fact, it lays out exactly how the Nazis took the means of production and became a socialist country, not just in name, but in practice. The point was that Hitler's driving goal wasn't socialism, it was nationalism. That socialism was more of a means to an end, and that since nationalism is on the far right scale of the spectrum and socialism is on the far left, these two are incompatible. But the thing about Nazi ideology is it wasn't really that far to the left or the right. It was fairly centered, but all the way on the authoritarian end of the spectrum, taking away basically as many liberties as possible from certain groups of society, but also from society as a whole. Even German citizens were under a very authoritarian thumb with the Nazis. And that's the real problem here. It's not nationalism, it's not socialism, it's authoritarianism. And while I do think that there are innate problems with nationalism and socialism when taken to the extremes, that's the real problem here, is extremism and authoritarianism. We need to start looking at our political ideologies and identities the way that we look at our diet. Everything in moderation. So, anarcho-capitalism is no better than full-on socialism. They both lead to, well, lots of death and individual liberties being stripped. What we need is, well, a mixed economy. How mixed, you might ask? That's up for debate, and ultimately speaking, the more that things become automated, the easier it is for us to socialize certain services moving forward. I'm not even saying that if we were to automate absolutely every business outside of the arts, that socialism on a certain scale couldn't work. However, that's just not the case. We're not technologically there yet. And as it is, without that automation, this means that any socialist country will have to put the needs of businesses above the needs of people in order to attempt to cover the needs of those people. And I know, I'm repeating myself now. But back to everything in moderation. Socialism's not bad because there are less, I guess, people who are born into unfortunate circumstances. And if we, as a country, have the ability, the wealth to help them, we should. And that takes us a step or two towards socialism. However, if we're doing this within a capitalist system of economics as opposed to a full-on socialist system, this allows for competition and for the progress that we inevitably see in most capitalist societies and none of the socialist ones. So this also ties in with a video I did on nationalism. You're probably a nationalist, but don't panic, because nationalism is another thing that we need to take in moderation. Now, a lot of people believe that nationalism means putting your country above all other countries at the expense of other countries. But if you look up the definition, it actually means putting your country ahead of all others. And then there's an addendum, which was added in recent years, especially at the expense of other countries. Now, I think nationalism that's not at the expense of other countries is perfectly reasonable. I think it's actually something that most people who don't hate the country that they live in experience, probably all of them. And that a little nationalism and socialism, two things which the Nazis were absolutists about, can be perfectly reasonable and healthy in a mixed capitalist economy. Again, all things in moderation. This is why a democratic republic, which, spreads out the voting opinions to the people, is actually a really good and healthy system of government, in my opinion. Now, as for fascism, I'll do another video on that. The point of this video wasn't to defend fascism. However, I think even the ideology most frequently called evil, and the one that's blamed above and beyond nationalism and socialism for a lot of the problems that are faced in fascist countries that were fascist, socialist, and nationalist, even fascism has its place in society in moderation. Now, I definitely think that government should protect the needs of the people over the needs of businesses, but these two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. There is a middle ground where governments can at least attempt to protect the needs of the people and the rights of the people, as well as the rights of businesses and business owners. The exact middle ground that we need to reach is something that I think is up for debate and always will be. This is why our world and our economies are constantly evolving. But there's one thing that we know for sure, and it's true with basically 100% accuracy historically. It can be put many ways, but this has always been my favorite. In a capitalist country, in a capitalist country, bread waits in line on shelves for you. In a socialist country, people wait in line for bread. This is because centralizing too much of the government makes it impossible for that government to take care of all of its needs. It is an extremely heavy burden placed on the government, which it cannot possibly sustain, even in the modern information era, without maybe some sort of AI program running it all above the humans. And I mean, there are some logical problems with that idea, but I just don't think humans are emotionally even close to ready to accepting it if it was a reality. And there's another thing. We look at these issues with pure logic, but humans are not purely logical beings. You can, argue that, okay, it would be purely logical to just kill disabled babies as soon as we find out about their disability, but no one's going to be willing to do that. Or the people that are such a small percentage that in any sort of fair democracy, they're never going to have a say in things. We need to start looking at things as logically as we can, but logically you have to take people's emotions into account when proposing policy. And that's something that socialism is absolutely incapable of doing once everything becomes centralized, because the government just doesn't have time to look into people's concerns, as it becomes far too concerned with managing itself and making sure that things run as smoothly as possible. Decentralize even just a little bit of those business interests back into a capitalist structure, and, well, look what happened for North Korea. They went from straight socialism that was literally killing their economy and their country, and brought in just a touch of capitalism. They're still not doing great, but they've been doing better year by year ever since they started openly trading with other countries again. So again, I might do a follow-up video on how fascism and anarcho-communism anarcho-capitalism are bad, or maybe I'll just do a video on how the real problems here are extremism and or authoritarianism. Usually extremist authoritarianism, but extremist anarchy is just as bad. if we want to hold on to our first world status, we need to do what every other country with a first world status has done and continues to do. And that is have a mixed economy. The closer that countries get to either side, the more problems they tend to face. Scandinavia at large tried socialism in like the 70s, maybe even prior, and then went back to a capitalist structure, because a lot of people like to point at Denmark as a socialist country, but the leaders of Denmark will tell you that socialism didn't work, that a mixed economy is what was necessary to get things back on the right track. So just to drive the point home, I'll say it one more time. Just like our diets, we want our political opinions to have everything in moderation. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Please like and subscribe, and share this video around, because I've seen a lot of people have actually sent me messages saying that I need more views, but I've only ever seen one person who actually shared my videos around. So thanks, Hit Girl, and if you like this video, send it to someone. Anyway, have a good one.